The night Marcus Hale agreed to the date, he stood in his kitchen staring at a cracked mug and wondered when his life had become so small. The house was quiet in the way only single-parent homes get quiet after bedtime, heavy with responsibilities and unfinished dreams. Outside, rain tapped the windows like impatient fingers, and inside, a man who once believed in forever braced himself for a joke he did not expect to change everything. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet miracles that show up when life feels exhausted, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this are for anyone who still hopes something gentle can happen again. Marcus lived in a modest duplex in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place with thin walls and neighbors close enough to hear your struggles if you let them. He was 36, a widower for 3 years, and a father to a 7-year-old boy named Caleb, whose laugh still surprised him with how much joy it carried. Since his wife passed, Marcus measured his days in lunches packed, shoes tied, overtime shifts, and the slow ache of learning to be both mother and father without ever feeling fully enough. He had stopped noticing himself, stopped caring about the mirror, stopped believing he deserved anything more than survival. Across the narrow driveway lived Grace Turner, his neighbor, a woman with an easy smile and a talent for showing up at the exact moment Marcus looked like he might drop something. She was a nurse, endlessly energetic, and too observant for her own good. Grace noticed the way Marcus always rushed, how his shoulders were permanently tense, how his eyes softened only when Caleb ran toward him after school. She also noticed how lonely he was, even when he tried to hide it behind politeness. One Saturday afternoon, while the kids on the block rode bikes in uneven circles, Grace leaned against her porch railing and teased Marcus about his serious face. She told him he needed a night out, a break from responsibility, a reminder that he was still a man and not just a machine running on coffee and obligation. Marcus laughed it off, the way people do when they do not want to admit how tired they are. Grace insisted, then smiled mischievously and said she had a solution, a harmless joke date with a friend who owed her a favor. Marcus protested, explaining that he had not been on a date since before the hospital nights and funeral arrangements. But Grace promised it would be painless and even funny. What Marcus did not know was that Grace's definition of funny involved shaking the foundations of carefully built walls. The days leading up to the date felt heavier than his usual routine. Marcus questioned everything, from his worn-out shoes to the idea of sitting across from a stranger pretending he still knew how to be interesting. He almost canceled twice. On the night itself, he tucked Caleb into bed with extra care, lingering a moment longer than usual, and reminded himself that this was just a joke, something to survive and forget. The restaurant Grace picked was warm and understated, a brick-front place in downtown Columbus with low lighting and soft music humming like a heartbeat. Marcus arrived early, palms damp, heart strangely loud in his chest. He reminded himself that he was not there to impress anyone, just to prove to Grace that he had tried. Then he saw her. Her name was Rebecca Lawson, though Marcus would learn that later. She walked in with quiet confidence, not flashy or loud, just present, like someone who had learned how to stand steadily in the world after it knocked her down a few times. She wore a simple dress and carried herself with a calm that immediately slowed Marcus's racing thoughts. There was something in her eyes, a depth that suggested both loss and resilience, that made him feel unexpectedly seen. From the beginning, the evening unfolded differently than Marcus expected. There was no forced laughter, no awkward pauses that begged to be filled. Time moved in a gentle way, like a river instead of a clock. Marcus found himself speaking honestly about work, about Caleb, about the strange guilt of wanting happiness again. Rebecca listened without rushing him, without trying to fix anything, offering understanding that felt earned rather than rehearsed. Marcus did not realize how long it had been since someone listened to him like that. Rebecca carried her own story, though she did not present it as a tragedy. She was a school counselor who had moved back to Ohio to care for her aging father after a difficult divorce. Life had not turned out the way she planned, but she had learned how to rebuild without bitterness. There was a steadiness to her presence that felt like a hand on Marcus's back when the world leaned too hard. As the evening stretched on, Marcus forgot that this was supposed to be a joke. He forgot the walls he had sworn to keep intact. He felt something dangerous and hopeful stirring in his chest, something he had buried under responsibility and grief. When the night ended, there was no dramatic moment, no promises or expectations, just a shared sense that something meaningful had quietly begun. In the weeks that followed, Marcus noticed subtle changes in himself. He smiled more even when he was alone. He stood a little straighter. He caught himself humming while making breakfast. Rebecca did not rush into his life. She stepped into it carefully, respecting the fact that Caleb was the center of Marcus's world. When she finally met his son, it was at a park on a bright Sunday afternoon, and she met him at eye level, offering patience instead of pressure. Caleb warmed to her slowly, then all at once, as children do when they sense safety. Not everything was easy. Marcus struggled with guilt, with the feeling that loving again somehow dishonored the woman he lost. There were nights he pulled away, moments when fear whispered that happiness was temporary and, therefore, dangerous. Rebecca did not demand reassurance. She gave him space without disappearing, understanding without enabling. Grace watched it all unfold from next door, amused and quietly satisfied, though she never took credit for more than a nudge. The real test came when Marcus faced a setback at work, an unexpected cut in hours that sent him spiraling into old anxieties. He worried about stability, about letting people down, about whether he was foolish to believe life could be generous again. It was during this time that Rebecca showed him what partnership looked like, not by solving his problems, but by standing beside him while he solved them himself. She reminded him of his strength, reflected his worth back to him when he forgot it. Months passed, marked by shared dinners, school events, and small traditions that grew into something solid. Marcus learned that love did not have to be loud to be real. It could be steady, patient, built from understanding and choice rather than fireworks. He learned that grief and joy could coexist, that honoring the past did not mean sacrificing the future. One evening, as Marcus tucked Caleb into bed, his son asked him why the house felt happier lately. Marcus did not have a perfect answer, only the truth that happiness sometimes arrives disguised as a joke you almost turn down. Standing in the hallway afterward, listening to the familiar sounds of his home, Marcus realized that the life he thought was over had simply been waiting for him to believe in it again. Before the story ends, take a moment to comment and share what part of this journey resonated with you the most. Your words might remind someone else that hope is closer than it feels. Near the end of that year, on a quiet winter night in Ohio, Marcus stood on his porch, watching snow fall in soft, determined flakes. Rebecca stood beside him, their shoulders nearly touching, the future unwritten but no longer frightening. Across the driveway, Grace waved with a knowing smile, and Marcus finally understood that sometimes love does not arrive with certainty or grand plans. Sometimes it arrives because someone cared enough to make a joke, and someone else was brave enough to say yes. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that second chances are not reserved for the fearless, please like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need them most, the ones standing in quiet kitchens wondering if life can still surprise them.